We have video cameras in the room, which is extremely rare for CIC. In fact, we typically say no to videotaping any event within CIC. I asked and I made an exception for this because I would like for this interview and for their experience to be shared with as many people as possible. This took quite a while to put this together, and I think I'd sent an email to you, and it took a while to get an answer, and then you're like, well, here's the best way to communicate with me, and I appreciate it. So it's been quite an experience. You know, I really wanted to change the way we see Matthew and Marcia, because even myself, I seen them as my grandma would describe my uncle that lived across the country from the rest of our family in Texas. They would come maybe once a year. My grandma always said, well, they were kind of like storybook people. You know, we'd get letters and we'd all read the letter and kept up with what was going on, but they wasn't real except around Christmas time. And so we've all read, and if I were to ask for a show of hands, how many of you were familiar with Matthew and Marcia? Yeah. So I just thought it was important that they no longer be storybook people to us that we just read about. This interview is not about the companies that were involved in the lawsuit that they were involved in. It's not about the individuals. None of that really matters. This is really about human impact as a result of bad decisions. And every one of us in this industry are in the position to make decisions. And those decisions impact people and their vehicles and their families and their safety. And it can be positive or it can be negative. So I think it's important that we start to think about the decisions that we make, the way we, as an industry, have discussions, that we always are considering those people that put their lives in our hands when we repair vehicles. We all, in every segment, have a role to play in these decisions. So let's just get started. I'll start with the first question, and that is, what made you choose the Honda Fit you purchased?
So we got married right after I finished graduate school intentionally. I stayed home with my mom and paid cash for grad school. Then we got married, and then Matthew started his college courses. He was working in a pharmacy and doing college to become a registered nurse. And partway through, the car that we purchased for my mom that she owned before us died, and he was about to start a new semester of school, commuting to work and to school. And so we hopped online through USAA has a car buying site that they help do research, and I looked up cars in our area with specific numbers of previous owners, the fewer the better. My parents and Matthew's parents both taught us, when you're looking at pre-owned cars, look for something under 15,000 miles per year on average, closer to 10 the better. And so we looked at those factors. We looked at mileage because he would be driving it across town to his college classes. And we looked up safety ratings, and we looked at, 4 safety ratings that may not have been optimal. What types of issues were those, and were they something that we expected him to encounter in the city? And we researched all of that, and we narrowed it down to a couple different cars, and then went and saw them in person, and eventually chose the Honda Fit because it had one previous owner, great mileage, good safety ratings, and Honda's reputable, and so we went with that vehicle.
Good. One of the things, and I appreciate that, because that was very similar to the story that my daughter Tiffany. That's exactly the thought process she had, and ended up with a Honda Fit. But one of the limitations I knew I would have in this interview, and as my wife Marie and I began to talk about the possibility of this interview, is I'm not always as good at being in touch with the human side. I'm a little more technical probably, and so as we began to talk, I'm like, you got to be in this interview. You're going to have to help because you can help with the human side of this, which is a big part of our goal. And so, so Marie's here, and I thank you for this journey. And I think you've got some questions you're going to try to get through, right?
So can you tell us about your lives and goals and plans that you had before the accident?
Well, I touched on it a little. So we got engaged and decided to have a long engagement because I could stay home with my mom and avoid student loans for graduate school. And I think when we were dating is when Matthew kind of solidified his goal was to eventually work in healthcare, and then he narrowed that down to being a registered nurse. And when I met him, I was actually a customer of his where he worked, and was immediately impressed by his customer service. And he has this way of helping people above and beyond without ever giving any indication that you're a burden or that it's troublesome to him. And so when he thought about being a nurse, I just thought it would be the perfect field for him to be able to help people. And so he started college, and after we got married and had a 4.0 GPA when this occurred.
Wow.
And so our goal was, he was working in a pharmacy, and we had started looking at maybe him moving into a hospital pharmacy to get some more connections for nursing. And so our plan was for him to finish school, move into nursing, and weren't sure what life would take after that. We knew when we got married, both of us are very close to our siblings. He's the oldest of 4, and I used to work in child welfare and with foster care and adoption, so we knew we had the goal of eventually fostering sibling groups to try to keep those relationships together. We weren't sure if we would also have biological children, but we knew we did want to do that, and that's part of our life plan that we've kind of had to grieve and let go of, because just any opportunity for parenting is just kind of gone from us for all of our limitations and stuff that we struggle with day to day.
Yeah.
And then Matthew also, there won't be an opportunity for him to return to school or work at this point because of some of his limitations and struggles that he has day to day. So we've had to kind of revamp all of that planning and grieve those parts of our lives and what we saw for ourselves.
So can you tell us about the day of the accident, what your plans were, at the beginning of the day?
Yeah.
Sure. We had plans to go down to my grandparents' house in the Hill Country for Christmas, the Hill Country of Texas. And I come from a family mostly of educators, and with the exception of my grandfather, my papa, who worked most of his life for Buick, actually, and he has plaques all around his garage from winning all these awards as working for them. And so it was kind of like a rite of passage for any new car into our family to be driven and looked over by Papa. We would go, anytime a new car came in, you'd go down to visit Grandma and Papa, and the next morning he'd have your keys in his hand, ready to take you out for a drive and look it over. So we decided for this trip at Christmas, since we just purchased the car a few months before, that we would take Matthew's car instead of mine so that Papa could see the new car. And so we got up on Saturday morning to drive down and had Christmas lunch planned with my extended family and cousins, grandparents, aunts, uncles. And there's a stopping point for my family on the way down that we always call and touch base and say, okay, here's where we are, and we're about 2 hours away. And we called my family and let them know. And then when we didn't show up at the estimated time and they all had food out on the table and were waiting for us, is when they started kind of questioning what was going on. And my mom started calling around in hospitals and state troopers trying to figure out where we were, and found out that we were in the hospital.
Yeah, that's kind of the one fear every parent has, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I don't know.
it's okay.
I'm sorry. This started and thought of me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, everybody here can understand.
So do you remember anything during the accident and after the accident?
I think I remember I remember driving in the rain and suddenly seeing a pickup truck that looked like it was parked sideways across the highway. And I learned later it was coming at us. So I remember it filling up the view of the entire windshield. And then there's a blank space. And then I remember waking up. It just smelled like rubber and it smelled bad. Marcia was not in the seat next to me anymore. And her door was open. Someone was trying to get me out. So I was hoping that she was pulled out. But it could have been not that. I got pulled out with some trouble and laid in the grass.
Yeah, it was some people that were actually
Yeah.
just on the scene, wasn't it, that pulled you out?
A gentleman had gone to pick up his son from Fort Hood. He was in the Marines, and he went to pick him up for Christmas, and they were driving by and saw, after the fact, the wreck, and saw that we were still in the car.
Oh, wow.
And so he and his son stopped to try to help, and other people on the scene told them to get away from the car because it was catching fire, and they were saying, you know, you need to stay safe, stay away from the car. And he said, well, there's still people in there.
Yeah. They were the
And
type of people
I
that run
think
towards a
people
burning
assumed we
car
weren't.
instead of run
They
from
were.
it.
They were. Yeah, and I'm
That's
sure
amazing.
why he's in the military. And
Yeah.
we keep in touch occasionally and text on holidays with them because they're very important people to us. But so he remembers more details and probably more that are hard to recount publicly. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to say anymore.
I don't know, after I got pulled out, I do remember lying in the grass. It's hard to move, but I did turn my head to the side and I saw the car
Yeah.
smoking and flames.
And it just kept getting hotter and hotter, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it's not a clear memory, but I do remember seeing the flickering of the fire.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing though that they pulled you out. You know. So
Yeah,
were you able to get out, or did somebody?
They had to pull me out,
They
and I
pulled you
was unconscious the whole time. They weren't even sure if I was alive still. I remember the night before the accident,
Uh-huh.
and the next thing I remember is 4 days later on Christmas Day, waking up in the ICU, intubated, and my stepmom having to kind of re-explain to me what all had happened, and that they told me that Matthew had been transferred to another hospital in Dallas, which specialized in burn treatment. And I very clearly remember thinking that my parents were lying to me and telling me that he'd been transferred because he hadn't survived the accident, and that they were trying to lie to me to keep me calm. So I did not believe until the next day when I saw his sister that he'd survived it, but because I knew there's no way she could have lied to me. She couldn't have
Yeah.
done it.
Yeah.
But so I have 4 days that I don't remember at all.
Do you know how long it took from the time of the accident till your family was notified of the accident?
The chaplain from the hospital that we were taken to called Matthew's parents because he was awake enough to provide that information. And then my mom got a call back from the state troopers within a couple hours. And so my family was able to drive. They all arrived at the hospital when I was in surgery, and no one could really explain what was going on, but they found out within a couple hours.
It's amazing how quickly our lives can change for the worse, and we've experienced some of that too. That one day everything's fine, and within an hour later it's not.
Yeah.
But such is life, and it certainly should make all of us, and those of us that have lived through those kind of events, we realize just how precious life is. And the thing that I really wanted to try to impact the industry with personally was we all, when we really stop and think about life and how easily it can change on us, how we begin to start to put it into perspective and how valuable it is. And I would love to see, if I were to have a vision for this industry, for me personally, it would be that we put the value of the human life ahead of everything else. And to me, that changes the conversation. I know this may be hard, but if you can you kind of tell us a little bit about your injuries. I mean, how?
Well, for me, the biggest thing was the burns. Seeing no skin on my lower part of my legs, seeing the muscles and tendons. That's not something you ever expect to see.
Right.
My left elbow was broken pretty bad, and it felt like a bag of rocks when I held it. And then there was a gash on my forehead, which is pretty bad as well. I don't know. I'm sure there are more, but those are the ones that stand out immensely.
And his burns it was 2 full years, more than 2 years.
Yeah.
In January of 2016 is when they finally healed up completely.
Wow. Yeah.
So we were doing wound cleaning that entire time.
Wrapping and unwrapping it every day. Washing it,
Yeah.
rewrapping it, putting creams on it, all that. It was a big part of my day, actually.
And then I had the tendons that attach the skull to the spine had torn away from my skull. So they had to do several surgeries to repair that. And the surgeon told me that a couple years before this, they didn't have an option for repairing it, and it would have meant either paralysis or death.
Wow.
And then I had my aorta, the lining of my aorta was torn, and so they had to put a stent in to reinforce that. We both had damage to our carotid arteries from the impact. I had perforated intestines, and then orthopedic injuries like pelvis was shattered, and my femur and arm, wrists, feet. So lots of orthopedic injuries, but those were definitely the lower severity or acuity, I should say. Minor surgeries quickly repaired my most severe injuries, and then I was able to do physical therapy, but his took a long time.
Yeah, both my heels are broken as well as the burns. So that was an issue on top of an issue.
He even had his most recent surgery for that was December of 2017.
Yeah, that's right.
December 2017.
That's right.
So I mean, surgeries
It took a
went
long
on for a
time.
long time.
Yeah. I know one of the things that stood out to me, if my memory serves me right, you guys can correct me if it's not, but if the OEM procedure had been followed and the spot welds had been put on there, there would have been a predictable outcome. Isn't that
Yes.
correct? And that outcome would have been?
I think it was Matthew's left leg would have been broken.
Yeah.
And that was
About it.
the predictable injury had the cage of the car not collapsed the way it had. One broken leg.
Yeah, and that's something. Decisions matter. Tell me again the story about how you guys even started to even realize that the car may not have been as it was supposed to have been.
I have a friend who was visiting me in the hospital who was asking me about Matthew and how he was doing, and I was explaining his burns, and she asked me, but why did the car catch on fire? And I said, I have no idea. I mean, it's a car. There's gasoline. I don't know. She said, but cars are designed to not catch on fire. That doesn't make any sense. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. Like, you would think that, we're past that engineering-wise. But I was in the hospital at the time. I didn't have time to think that through, and we had to pass off handling of all the insurance stuff and things to an attorney. And my dad told me he plays 42, which is a dominoes game, with the mom of an attorney out in East Texas, and so he connected me with him just to help handle all of that insurance stuff that we couldn't deal with because we were both recovering. And that attorney called me one day, and he'd had the car towed to somewhere where he could look at it, and he said, I've been doing this for a long time, and this just doesn't look right. Do you mind if I have someone else who I've known for years who's better at understanding these types of things? His name's Todd Tracy. Do you mind if I have him look at the car to see if he can help me figure out what's going on? And I said, I don't care. Do whatever you need to do. I'm just here doing physical therapy. So he had Todd Tracy look at the car and call me back and said, there's just something that wasn't that's wrong. We need to kind of look into the history of this car and figure out where it came from and what repair work's been done on it, because something's not right with the roof here. And that was the first indication we really had that this wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. This was something intentionally chosen to have been done to the vehicle that impacted everything that had happened to us. And it's one thing to be dealing with the most traumatic thing unraveling your life, but then to find out that there were choices along the way that were made that increase the likelihood of this happening to you and contributed to it is just re-traumatizing. And there was a whole different grieving process that had to happen with that.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine.
There's something that's striking me right now thinking about it is that this accident and all the effects of it that happened, it was a domino effect from a specific improper repair. Domino effect of that affecting the structural integrity of the car, and then the gas tank getting punctured and all that. And then hearing about the way that we found these lawyers, that was also kind of a domino effect, which it's unusual. And then it went to litigation and all that stuff. But it's unusual that we had those people that fought for us as well. It's unusual that it came out the way it did, but there's so many people that this probably happened to that either, one, don't know what the domino effect that caused the issue was, or they don't have the help to figure it out afterwards.
Yeah, it was
You
just
don't
like it
hear
was
about
meant
these
to be,
people.
wasn't it? It was just a series of things that happened that made it.
I don't know about meant to be,
Yeah.
but we
Right.
were fortunate that we got the answers that we have, because I think it would be intentionally naive to pretend that there aren't people who have been injured or had fatal accidents that weren't impacted by something like this. It would just be naive.
Yeah.
And people that will never know those answers. It was so helpful in even just the healing process to understand better that there was an actual series of things that contributed to this. Most people don't get to know, whether it's the death of a family member or something traumatic in their life. They don't get to know the hows and the whys, and we were fortunate to get that answer.
Yeah. Well, you've certainly made an impact on our industry, as we've been talking, probably more than you guys realize. You've made I would like to say a positive impact on the industry. It has raised the level of awareness, and I think I shared with you a story of a shop that was repairing a roof, and after there wasn't a procedure, but they repaired it, and then they began to have the conversation about your situation and your story. And so they started looking at the old roof and comparing it to what they had done, and realized that they had not put as many spot welds in. And so the technicians and the shop owner, in a conversation, decided, based on your situation, what happened to you, that they would tear the roof off, order a new roof, and spend the time to redo the job and make sure they put the proper number of spot welds on it, and to ensure that they had repaired it as properly as possible. That's just one example. You'll hear others probably over time, but there's numerous states that have those sorts of efforts. In fact, we're going to hear a little bit about that later today. But it seems like that some of them have struggled. I think one was recently vetoed, and I know, based on what you do for a living, you had a really impactful statement about following procedures.
Right. And what you're describing with the minivan situation, that's what integrity in practice is about. That's knowing that there's things that you're going to do that people may or may not find out about, but you want to make sure don't have a negative impact on other people.
Yeah.
And I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Texas, and one of the things drilled into us from day one in any social work course is our code of ethics, and part of that is only using evidence-based practices with our clients. It's one thing for me to say that I think your depression can be cured by eating 3 grapes a day, Where am I getting that from? Like, just because it's my belief, that's not ethical for me to then put that into practice with a client whose life may depend on that intervention, unless there's evidence to support it. And so we are trained to look into practices and theories and modalities that are supported by evidence, and there's been research and proof showing why this intervention is effective with this specific diagnosis or need with a client. And I just can't fathom practicing any other way. And when people go to purchase new vehicles, they know that there are standards that have been put into place with the engineering and development of those new vehicles. And it's not reasonable to expect people to only be able to make those informed decisions if they're purchasing new vehicles that aren't pre-owned and have ever been repaired. For us to have the standard that you only get to make that informed choice for yourself and your family and other people on the roads if you purchase a car new and know it's never been repaired, that's just unreasonable. It would be wasteful. It would be cost prohibitive. You can't expect that of people. I was trying to look up the statistic earlier today and couldn't find a good source, so I don't want to say a specific one, but the things I read said a car will have on average 2 to 3 owners in its lifetime. And the second and third owners don't have any less right to that informed decision making as the first. So the way to make that happen is that work done on vehicles after they're come off the line needs to also be evidence-based. If you're going to tell me that this repair work is as good as or better than the original design, you should be able to show the evidence to support that, and there's research to support that.
That's good.
So can you tell us what a typical day is like at home for you guys now?
I don't know about typical. I will say on the way here, preparing for this trip, I was very intentional about trying to think through how many decisions were we making that were revolving around our injuries and the effects. And it was just impossible to keep up with. From things that we packed, clothes, shoes that we packed, which airline we chose to come on, and how we picked our flights and the time of day, and everything. It's like having a third person traveling with you at all time and going through your day to day. Matthew's functioning on any given day is very inconsistent. And for probably I'd say probably about 30 hours before getting ready for this trip the night before, I don't think he got out of bed for any meaningful amount of time. And I couldn't have a conversation with him. That's not an unusual thing to happen. There's days that he has good functioning days. Today's seems to be a better day, but there's days that we can't hold a conversation. Pain is constant for both of us. Mine's much more manageable and doesn't interfere as much with my day-to-day life and my job. His prevents him from going to family functions a lot of times, or everything is hour by hour.
Yeah, I don't think there's a normal day, but there are normal types of days. There are days when I can focus for a while. There are when the pain's not so bad. There are other days when the pain is, I just have to curl up in bed for hours. I sleep, like she said. I'll sleep for like 12 hours maybe. And then other nights I don't sleep at all, or maybe a couple hours. So like she said, it's hard to tell what, for both of us, it's going to be like on any given day. Yeah.
So has this then affected your relationship with extended family?
Oh, for
Absolutely. Sure. I mean, our oldest niece remembers us from before the wreck. And she has such a good relationship with us. And anytime I go over to my sister's house to see her, I get a "Hi, Aunt Marcia," followed by a "Where's Uncle Matt?" like very quickly. She remembers us, and she was a toddler when this happened, and I have a memory of her coming and climbing in the hospital bed with me. All the children born after that don't really have that same relationship with Matthew specifically. They somewhat with me, but they haven't had us in their lives as much, and going to planning family functions is very contingent and on how we're feeling, but
And we need a backup plan as well. So if we're at the function, there's a place to, just crash, rest, take meds, that kind of thing.
right, go to sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Olivia came to visit me in the hospital, and I gave her a big hug, and they were going to go next to the hospital Matthew was at, because we were in different places for a long time. And I told her, I was like, Olivia, I want to give you a hug, and you're going to go see Uncle Matt next. I need you to give this hug to him, but his left arm is really hurt, so make sure you don't hug that arm. And so then he called me later in the day, and he said, Olivia did the weirdest thing when she came into my room. She walked up and she looked at me and she hugged just my right arm, and I don't know what that was about. And I said, I do. She remembered what I said, and she was being very careful with you.
Yeah, that's good. Well, as we've started to talk to you and get to know you, there was two words to describe what I got. One was, you guys are very strong, and the others, you're very courageous. And I'm thankful and appreciative that you've taken the time and the effort to come here. And I think that it's very meaningful, and I can't thank you enough. I think it means a lot for everybody here too, to hear you guys, your story. So it's very impactful, and I want you to know you have no telling how many lives you will have saved because of your strength and your courage and your willingness to come here and to tell your story. This videotape, I'm sure, is going to be watched by a lot of people who could not be here. I'm sure it will be, and it can't help but make people stop and think that we can make a difference. So.
We would never pretend that other people don't have their lives turned upside down by traumatic events, and some, whether it's, the death of a child or cancer, things that you can't even prevent, that aren't preventable. That happens to people on a daily basis. And not everyone is given the opportunity to really turn those lemons into lemonade. And I feel like y'all have given us the opportunity and the platform for that. And can't thank you enough for that, because that's the most meaning that we can draw from this experience. And we're very grateful for that. And we're really grateful for everyone just being willing to sit in this space with us and hear the story, and hope that you walk away with that when you make decisions in your practices. And that's all we can hope for, is that you'll remember that.
Good. Thank you. Well, it does come down in our business and our industry to decisions, and I will continue this next year, if I'm continue to be CIC chair, if I'm allowed to be, this point around, we can't get away from the fact that our decisions make a difference. They make an impact, whether it be good or bad. And a complete and safe repair and the value of human life should be the number one thing in our industry, and realize we do have a decision that can impact that. So I appreciate you guys being here. Marie, thanks for supporting this. This was tough, and I know it had to be really tough for you guys. And so thank you very much. Thank you.